Have you ever felt like your words don't go anywhere? Like your prayers rise up, but nothing ever comes back down? Like you're screaming on the inside, but silence is the only answer you receive? Maybe you've spent countless nights asking, begging, waiting, and nothing happens. Maybe the people you love drifted away. Maybe you lost something so important you can't even put it into words anymore. And in the middle of all that, a cold thought cuts through you. You've been abandoned. But what if I told you that this abandonment isn't what you think it is? What if the silence you're so afraid of is actually the place where Jesus is trying to speak to you? Because there's a deep difference between being rejected and being set apart. Rejection is when someone discards you. Separation is when something greater has to happen inside you before you can truly hear. You know this pain, the pain of not being heard, the pain of waiting and seeing nothing change, the pain of waking up every day with the same heaviness, the same emptiness, the same question pounding in your chest. Why doesn't God answer me? This isn't just about prayers. It's about you. It's about feeling like even heaven has gone deaf. It's about looking up and finding nothing but an empty ceiling. And you know what hurts even more? Seeing other people who seem to get answers. They seem embraced. They seem sure that God is close. While you're left with nothing but silence. If you're going through this season, subscribe to the channel to receive more messages like this. But today, something is going to change in the way you see that silence, because Jesus lived this too. He knew silence. He knew waiting. He knew abandonment. And it was right there, in the quietest place of all, that he did what mattered most. So take a deep breath, because what you're about to hear can turn everything upside down. It can transform what you thought was rejection into something much bigger. Something you can't see yet, but that is being prepared right now in the silence that scares you so much. There is a reason. And before this moment ends, you will understand why God is silent precisely when we need him the most. There is a kind of abandonment that never shows up in photos. It doesn't spark worried conversations. No one notices it when you walk into a room. It's silent abandonment, the kind that happens on the inside. You can be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone. You can have family, friends, routines, responsibilities, and still carry a void that no one sees. Because this abandonment isn't about who is around you. It's about who is no longer inside you. Maybe it was someone who left when you needed them most. Someone who promised they would stay but walked away. Someone who made you believe you mattered, until one day they simply stopped caring. And you tried to understand, you tried to forgive, you tried to move on. But something broke. A part of you that trusted, that hoped, that believed, that part left with them. Now you carry a question you can't escape. What's wrong with me? Because when we're abandoned, it's not just the person who leaves. Our sense of worth leaves too. Our certainty that we deserve to be chosen disappears. Our ability to believe someone will stay is shaken. And the hardest part comes when you take that pain to God, when you kneel, when you pray, when you cry, and nothing happens. You expected comfort. You expected to feel something. You expected an answer, a sign, a reassurance that he was there. But all you find is more silence. And then the most painful thought of all appears, did Jesus abandon me too? Because if people leave, maybe you can understand it. People fail. People change. People are imperfect. But God should be there. God should answer. God should be different. Yet he doesn't respond. And that breaks you in a way you can't explain to anyone. You try to keep your faith. You try to believe everything is okay. You try to smile, to give thanks, to say you trust. But deep down, in the deepest place, you're screaming, "Where are you?" And this is exactly where most people give up, because they interpret silence as rejection, as if God turned his back, as if they weren't important enough to be heard. But what if that's not what's happening? What if God's silence isn't absence, but a different kind of presence? What if he isn't far away, but so close that you can't yet handle the weight of that closeness? Because the abandonment you feel right now, the pain no one sees, the loneliness that suffocates you, it isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of something you don't yet understand, something that can only be revealed when everything around you goes quiet, when human voices fall silent, when distractions stop, when you are finally alone with the only voice that truly matters. But to hear that voice, you have to stop running from the silence. You have to stop filling the emptiness with noise. You have to stop interpreting the absence of words as the absence of love. Because Jesus knows this abandonment. He lived it. He felt it. And if you pay attention, you'll realize that the deepest moments of his life weren't the moments of crowds. They weren't the moments of visible miracles. They weren't the moments of applause. They were moments of silence, moments of solitude, moments of waiting. And it was right there that he prepared himself to do what no one else could do. So maybe, just maybe, the abandonment you're feeling right now isn't the end. Maybe it's the beginning of the greatest transformation of your life. This is the question that eats you alive. The question you ask in the middle of the night when sleep won't come. The question that follows you as you try to live a normal day, carrying an invisible weight in your chest. Why? Why would God, who is love, allow you to feel abandoned? Why would he, who can do anything, stay silent when you need him most? Why is silence the only thing you receive when you're crying out for help? You're not the first to ask these questions. The Bible is filled with people who lived this exact experience. People who cried out and heard nothing back. People who waited and found only emptiness. People who trusted and felt forgotten. David cried out in the wilderness. Job lost everything and didn't understand why. Mary and Martha sent for Jesus when Lazarus was dying, and he waited on purpose. And while he waited, Lazarus died. While he waited, they wept. While he waited, they felt abandoned. But here's the point that changes everything. God's silence was never about a lack of love. It was about the depth of his purpose. Because God wasn't absent, he was working on something they couldn't see yet. And maybe that's exactly what's happening to you right now. Maybe the silence isn't punishment. Maybe it's preparation, because the truth is this. While you're desperate for a quick answer, God is building something eternal. While you want immediate relief, he is forging real transformation. While you're asking for the pain to stop, he is using that pain to free you from something much bigger, but you can't see that yet. And that's why it hurts so much. Because we are impatient by nature. We want answers now. We want instant solutions. We want God to act our way, on our timeline, according to our will. And when he doesn't, we call it abandonment. But what if the problem isn't God's absence, but our inability to hear what he's saying in a different way? Because God doesn't shout. He doesn't compete with the noise of your life. He doesn't force his way in. He waits. He stays silent. He allows everything around you to quiet down until you finally stop running and start listening. And that's terrifying, because in the silence you're alone with yourself, with your pain, with your wounds, with your unresolved truths. In the silence, you can't run anymore. In the silence, you can't pretend. In the silence, you're forced to look inward. And maybe that's exactly what God needs to happen. Because while you're looking outward, asking for circumstances to change, for people to come back, for doors to open, he's trying to show you something that's broken inside you. Something that can only be healed when you stop. When you quiet yourself. When you finally surrender to the process. Jesus did this. He withdrew. He sought silence. He spent nights alone, with no one around, no noise, no distractions, and it was there, in that silent place, that he was strengthened, that he heard the Father, that he prepared for what was coming next. Silence wasn't the absence of God. It was his full presence, and before every great act, before every powerful miracle, Before every victory, there was silence, there was waiting, there was solitude. So maybe the silence you're living in right now isn't a sign that God abandoned you. Maybe it's a sign that something great is about to happen. But before it does, you need to learn something. You need to grow in something. You need to be freed from something. And that can only happen in silence, because in noise you get distracted. In noise, you fill the emptiness with anything. In noise, you never truly face what needs to be faced. But in silence, there's nowhere to run, and that's exactly where God reaches you. Now let me ask you a question that could change everything. What if the silence you're experiencing right now is the preparation for something you couldn't handle yet? What if God isn't ignoring you, but protecting you? What if He's shaping you, strengthening you, preparing you to receive something that would destroy you if it came too soon? Because we're not always ready for the answer. We're not always mature enough to carry the blessing. We're not always prepared for the next season. And God, who loves you more than you can imagine, will not give you something you can't yet sustain. So He waits, He works, He transforms. And from your perspective, it looks like abandonment, but from His perspective, it's love in its deepest form. So hold on, because what comes after the silence will make complete sense. And when it does, you'll look back and thank God for every second He made you wait. There comes a moment when everything changes, a moment when silence stops being pain and becomes revelation. It's not that the pain disappears overnight. It's not that everything suddenly makes sense, but something inside you begins to shift. You begin to realize that the emptiness was never empty, that the silence was never absence. It was always language. Because God doesn't speak only with words. He speaks through silence. He speaks through waiting. He speaks through what looks like nothing, but is actually saying everything. Have you noticed how the deepest things in life don't need sound? A genuine hug needs no explanation. A loving look needs no speech. A presence that calms you doesn't have to shout to be felt. Jesus was like that. He didn't fill the air with empty words. He didn't shout to be heard. He didn't compete for attention. He was simply present, and His presence changed everything. Sometimes He healed in silence. Sometimes He just looked, and the person understood. Sometimes He said nothing, and still, those near Him knew something had changed. Because Jesus' power was never in His words, it was in His presence. And presence makes no noise. It transforms in silence. So maybe what you need right now isn't more answers. Maybe you need to stop demanding that God speak the way you want and start listening to the way He is speaking, because He is speaking, just not with words. He's speaking through the peace you feel in the middle of chaos, through the strength you didn't know you had, through the endurance that carried you even when you wanted to quit. He's speaking through silence, and silence has its own language, a language that can't be learned in noise, a language understood only by those who stop, who wait, who surrender. In silence, you notice things the noise was hiding. You realize you were looking for answers outside when the real answer was within. You realize you were trying to fill a void with things that could never fill it. You realize the abandonment you felt wasn't God rejecting you, but a necessary separation from everything that was keeping you from truly finding Him. Because in noise, we deceive ourselves. In noise, we confuse emotion with faith, distraction with purpose, movement with progress. But in silence, there's no pretending. In silence, you either find God for real, or you realize you never truly knew Him. And maybe that's why silence hurts so much at first, because it exposes, it reveals, it removes every mask, but that's also why it heals. Because you can't be transformed while hiding. You can't be restored while running. You can't grow while filling every moment with noise just to avoid feeling what needs to be felt. Silence forces you to feel, and by feeling, you finally begin to heal. Jesus knew this. That's why He withdrew. That's why he sought quiet places. That's why he spent hours, sometimes entire nights alone, not because God was far away, but because in silence he was closer than ever. And now you're beginning to understand. You're starting to see that the silence wasn't punishment. It was an invitation to stop running, to stop looking outside for what can only be found within, to stop shouting and start listening, because God never abandoned you. He was waiting for you to slow down long enough to finally hear him. There are things that can only be learned when everything stops, when voices fall silent, when distractions fade, when you are finally alone with God. And what Jesus is teaching you in this silence can't be explained with words. It has to be lived, felt, experienced deep within your soul. He's teaching you the difference between depending on answers and depending on him. Because maybe until now, you've been seeking God for solutions, for relief, for change. But in silence, you learn that God isn't a problem solver. He is the solution. He's teaching you that real faith doesn't need constant proof, that true love doesn't demand explanations every second, that real trust holds firm even when you don't understand. He's showing you that you're stronger than you thought, that you can endure more than you imagined, that there is a steadiness inside you that only appears when everything around you falls apart. He's freeing you from the need to control, because while you were trying to control everything, orchestrate everything, force things to happen your way, you weren't trusting. You were managing anxiety, but in silence, you let go. You surrender. You stop fighting what you can't change and start trusting the one who can change you. Jesus is teaching you to live by faith, not by sight, to walk without seeing the whole path, to trust without having all the answers. And that is what separates those who truly know God from those who only know about him. Because anyone can believe when everything is going well. Anyone can give thanks when blessings are obvious. Anyone can praise when there are clear reasons. But believing in silence, being thankful while waiting, praising when there's nothing to celebrate, that's faith on another level. And that's exactly what Jesus is forging in you right now. But there's more. Something only those who pass through silence discover. There is a specific lesson that only silence teaches, and it changes everything. The lesson that you were never alone, that in every moment you thought you were abandoned, Jesus was there. Quiet but present, silent but active, invisible to your eyes, but sustaining every step you took. And when you finally understand this, when it becomes real inside you, nothing will shake you the same way again. Because you'll know that no matter what comes, no matter who leaves, no matter how many doors close, Jesus stays. He always has. He always will. And that certainty is worth every second of silence you had to endure. Now you need to understand something crucial, something that can determine whether this pain transforms you or destroys you. Because there is a real danger, one most people don't notice until it's too late. The danger of running from silence. When silence comes, when loneliness tightens its grip, when the lack of answers becomes unbearable, the temptation is to fill the emptiness with anything. Any noise will do. Any distraction works. Anything to feel less alone, less lost, less abandoned. You turn on the TV, you scroll endlessly on your phone, you chase shallow conversations, you bury yourself in work, you jump into relationships that shouldn't exist, anything not to feel, anything not to be alone with the silence. But here's the painful truth. Every time you run from silence, you delay your healing. Every time you fill the void with noise, you prevent God from doing what needs to be done. Every time you choose distraction over confrontation, you choose to stay exactly where you are. Because transformation doesn't happen in noise, it happens in silence. And if you keep running, you'll spend your entire life moving from one place to another, from one person to another, from one quick fix to another, and you'll never find what you truly need. Because what you need isn't outside, it's inside. And it can only be reached when you stop running. Jesus never ran from silence. He never filled the void with empty distractions. He never looked for relief in the wrong places. He faced it. He felt it. He walked through it. And that's why he could carry the weight of everything that came afterward. But if you keep running, there will come a moment when the weight is too much, and you won't have the strength to carry it. Because spiritual strength isn't built in comfort. It's built in the wilderness, in silence, in waiting. And if you skip this stage, if you cut the process short, if you look for shortcuts, you'll arrive unprepared for what God is preparing for you. You'll open doors you shouldn't open, accept people you shouldn't accept, say yes to things you should refuse, all because you never learned to be at peace in silence, all because you never developed the maturity to wait, all because you chose quick relief over deep transformation. And the worst part, one day you'll look back and realize you wasted time, that you took unnecessary detours, that the pain you tried to avoid ended up multiplying. So don't run. Don't fill the emptiness with the wrong relationships just to avoid feeling alone. Don't throw yourself into addictions, overwork, or anything that makes you forget what you should be facing. Stay in the silence, as painful as it is, as frightening as it feels, as unbearable as it seems. Stay, because it's right there, exactly there, that Jesus is waiting for you, not with ready-made answers, not with magical solutions, but with presence, with love, with the strength you need to go through this and come out the other side completely transformed. And when you do come out, and you will, you'll look back and be grateful you didn't run, because silence wasn't your enemy. It was your greatest teacher. So here we are, at the end of this journey, and maybe at the beginning of another. Because now you know the silence was never abandonment. You know the absence of words never meant the absence of love. You know that when God was silent, it wasn't because he forgot you. It was because he was doing something words could never express. Remember the question from the beginning, what if the silence you fear is exactly where Jesus is trying to speak to you? Now you have your answer. Silence wasn't the problem. It was the solution. It wasn't punishment. It was an invitation. It wasn't rejection. It was preparation, because God didn't abandon you when everything went quiet. He set you apart. He isolated you. He placed you where nothing else could compete for your attention, where no human voice could distract you, where no quick solution could deceive you, where you finally had to choose truly trust him or give up completely. And you didn't give up. You're still here. You endured. You made it through. And even if you don't have all the answers yet, even if questions remain, even if the road ahead still looks uncertain, something inside you has changed. You are not the same person who entered that silence. You were transformed, strengthened, matured. And now you know something most people never will. You know how to hear God even when he doesn't speak. You know how to trust even when you don't understand. You know how to stand firm even when everything around you collapses, because Jesus taught you this in silence, in waiting, in solitude. He showed you that his presence doesn't depend on words, that his love doesn't need constant proof, that his faithfulness remains steady even when you don't feel it, and that is everything. Because life will keep placing you in quiet seasons. It will keep making you wait. It will keep challenging you to trust without seeing. But now you know how to walk through it. Now you know that silence is not the end of the conversation. It's where the deepest conversation happens. So the next time you feel abandoned, when your prayers seem to go nowhere, when heaven feels closed and you're alone with your pain, remember this. Remember that Jesus is there, silent but present, invisible but active, quietly transforming everything. And that silence is not his absence. It is the deepest way he is with you, because God doesn't shout, he doesn't compete, he doesn't force. He waits for you to quiet the world around you so you can finally hear him. And when you do, when you truly hear, everything changes. Maybe you weren't abandoned. Maybe God quieted everything around you so he could finally speak to you. And now that you've heard, now that you understand, now that you know, you will never be alone again. Because Jesus never left. He was waiting for you to stop looking to him for answers and start looking for him. And that makes all the difference. If you want to continue this spiritual journey, subscribe and turn on notifications. Leave a comment and tell us, which part touched you the most?